Jim, when I volunteered to do this, and I'm thinking the last time I volunteered for something, I ended up in Africa for the year. So I don't do that. He asked what my qualifications are. I've been shocked several times. I'm a former electrician. I taught electrical construction in a trade school, and then I went back and got a degree in electrical engineering. So sometimes I even know why things don't work. I'm going to not cover everything. I'm not going to read this to you. Hopefully everybody can read their own. I do have a couple questions before we get started. How many people here have an American motorcycle? Okay. How many people have a British, English motorcycle? And how about European? Okay. And then the wild card, Japanese. I noticed some of you voted more than once, and that's fine. Hey, I like to honestly be able to tell my wife I don't know exactly how many bikes there are. So I understand the motorcycle acquisition syndrome. We're going to cover 3 systems: ignition system, lighting system, and the charging system. There are some requirements by the states of what you have to have on the bike. It does not force you to upgrade a bike that was compliant when it was built. Now you'll have some people argue with you. Some of them wear badges, but I have had some experience with people wanting high beam indicators on a bike that barely had low beams. So there's on the back, well, the next to the last page, there's a section called references, and it has the Kansas vehicle statutes that apply to what you have to have. And so you can, it's pretty straightforward language on that, when things went into effect and when you have to do something, which is nice. If you've got a British bike, you're familiar with positive ground. If you got something else, you're probably familiar with negative ground. There's no practical difference between the two. Light's light, capacitor's charge. Switching from one to the other is where you can get in trouble with your voltage regulator, especially if it's a Zener diode, and with the capacitor. So that's just something to keep in mind. And I did find a reference that originally cars were positive ground because the cloth-based insulation would get wet and let the fuzz that accumulates on the terminals migrate up the wire beneath the insulation. But that hasn't been a problem now for 80 years or so. So we'll just note it. And I say the cutoff date for consideration in this article is about 1980. That's about when British became irrelevant and before everybody had their own kind of electronic ignition. So we're covering the standard magneto points or electronic ignition, what they have in common. Now, tool-wise, one of my favorite testers, when I went online to see if I could find it, These are very common in Europe, but not so common around here. It tells you whether it's positive or negative. It tells you you can go up to 400 volts with this thing, so you can use it. And the other good thing about it is it's a passive system. There is no battery. The battery won't go dead, and you won't get any false readings by it being too sensitive. That's one of the problems with the electronic meter. Now,
So who manufactures that unit?
that's called Stiebel, and you can get it, you can find it online, but they're shipped from the UK. I'll try to pick up one or two next time I go to Germany, which hopefully is going to be soon. Then dealing with a multimeter, there's basically, it's good to have a nice multimeter like this that reads capacitance and inductance. It helps you read, the inductance helps you read coils, and the capacitance, if you've got a capacitor supplement system, shall we say. The other nice thing is if you buy a decent one, it will shut itself off when you neglect it for 15 minutes or so, and you're not spending the first 10 minutes of your project trying to scramble batteries for your tester. Now, there are advantages to the old swinging needle ones. One of the advantages is they don't lie. They don't sit there and twitch between 4.5 and 4.7 and 4.3. So if you're watching something charge up, you get to see the needle move. You don't get to see numbers that change either too slow to be of use or too fast to read. So that and a timing light and a dwell meter, those are prime candidates for garage sale acquisitions. I don't know if anybody makes, I imagine they still make timing lights for something, but it's hard to run through a garage sale without running into some of that stuff. Test light. I just grabbed the first bulb in the box, put a couple leads on it. Now, if you could, the old style lump of solder bulbs, just cut the ends off the lead and solder it on. If you keep blowing fuses, you put this across where the fuse was, and as long as it's lit, you've got a dead short. Okay? But you won't blow the fuse, you won't burn anything out because your current's limited by the bulb. When you figure out what is causing it, the bulb will go off. So this is also if you have to set the points initially on the old bikes. Nobody uses cigarette papers to check the gap anymore, I hope.
You're not supposed to.
So, and a soldering iron. If you do, lots of people use crimp connectors. They're fine if they're crimped right. One shot on each side, that's all they need. And you can get them that have like a hot melt glue in them. So you can crimp it and then heat it with a heat gun and flow it and make it waterproof. If you're going to go through the trouble of doing it, I suggest you make things as waterproof as possible. So, come back. And the last page is a nice diagram that somebody else drew of a Norton Commando wiring system. And we'll refer to that off and on when we talk about components. So our first system is the ignition system. That's the only one that every bike has. And the absolute I talk a little bit about spark plugs, and somebody knowledgeable in spark plugs and carbs should do a presentation. The big thing to remember is the resistor plugs came in the 60s. You should use resistor plugs unless it's period incorrect, or you don't care about radio interference. But they're non-resistor plugs are like everything else. It's 50 years past its prime, getting harder to find. The simplest system is a magneto. You've got leads to the spark plugs, and you've got one terminal to ground it to kill the engine. All you need. Now, I didn't say it's the most reliable one. I didn't say it's the most robust system. Remember, all your magnetos are 50 years old. So it's time to think about whether I don't know of anybody that specializes in magnetos. They tend to get old and go on to other things. Jim, do you know of anybody, or does anyone else have a recommendation for a magneto person?
I sent a couple off to the Fairbanks Sports Place. It was in Kansas City, Kansas, but that was when Moses wore short pants.
I guess it depends what type of magneto you're dealing with too. I mean, early American stuff, there's a number of places, but there's other places that do British stuff, Lucas magnetos, back east.
Back east and shipping them back to England.
I think my brother Lon knows of some for his Vincent.
Okay.
I think there's some advertised in the AMCA magazine. People that'll rebuild a magneto for you. Older magneto.
Right. But, it's not the same as knowing that somebody in KCK does it and has done 5 or 10 for club members.
Right. Imagine it's expensive.
Everything else is. I like the fact that magnetos typically, as in the majority of them out there, spin a magnet inside a coil to work and then step up the voltage. You can tell if there's a step-up transformer involved, like the old Joe Hunt magnetos and that. If it's shaped like E.T.'s head, then it's got a step-up coil in it. Not that it makes much difference on working on them, but just a fun thing to know. Troubleshooting, if there's no spark, prepare to send it to an expert. Spark plug caps. Remarkably, they're a source of trouble. You get water in them. The universals where you cut the wire and screw this on, those can come loose and start arcing internally. They're cheap. Again, unless you're going for period correct, just buy them when you do the project. And then there's the ballast.
So what's the best type to use?
What's the best type? The best type is a silicone one without a suppressor in it. You'll see some of the old Japanese stuff that have a metal outside shell. But you want to buy something where the connector, the high voltage connector to the cap of the spark plug is molded to the wire coming into feed. You want to eliminate as many amateur connections as possible. So you can buy a set of wires, decent wires for a V8 and fix. Ballast resistors. Now, as far as I can tell, they exist simply so they can make it cheaper.
Kawasaki use those a lot.
And if we look at this the diagram of the Norton, the ballast resistors right here feeding in the line feeding the coil. So there's your clue. If you've got no spark coming through, you might want to check to make sure the ballast resistor is there. If you're burning up wires, you might want to check that somebody eliminated the ballast resistor. And it gives a value in here that it should be roughly equal to the resistance of the coil, so you drop half the voltage. Then you get into what happens if you do an electronic ignition, an aftermarket one. A lot of them will then tie those two coils in series and do a wasted spark on them. Then you don't need the ballast resistor. But again, follow the directions for the Podtronics or Boyer Branson or whoever's making the aftermarket ignition system.
You say it should be half the value of the coil?
It should be about equal to the value of the coil.
And how do you find the value of the coil?
You measure it with an ohm meter.
Ohm meter, so it'd be very low.
Right, it's gonna, yeah, and that's one where you want to use a digital meter because it hasn't got enough resistance to kick that needle up very far on an analog to figure out what's going on. And that's okay. Yeah, if you look on the web for ballast resistor, they'll talk about the fact that they bypass them in the start connection for a car. So when you turn the key to crank, it bypasses that resistor and you get twice as much current through there. And you don't burn anything up because it only runs that much current until the car starts. I haven't seen any motorcycles done that way. Theoretically, it's possible. And there's been enough bikes of enough different kinds out there that I'm sure somebody's done it before. But basically, here's another question for the audience. How many of you have electric start motorcycles? How many have ones that you kick? You'd think that we'd be adapting this kick portion to use the ballast resistor, to cut the ballast resistor off and get a higher voltage so it would start better when you kicked it. But you don't have a crank position in the key, which you do on the ones that are electric start. So, you know, someday I'll build a bike and put a switch on it and just confuse somebody down the road another 20 years. What the hell, that's not a diagram?
I've heard that. Let me see how this works. Yep. Ignition, electronic ignitions require a little bit more RPMs on a kickstart bike than point systems.
I don't think so.
That the spark produced from a point system is a little hotter, and you don't have to kick it with as much
Well,
RPM to get it going.
When you get into electronic ignition, some of them are capacitive discharge systems, CDIs, and those give you a hotter spark, you know, at basically 0 RPM, 0 speed on the kick. So I don't think there's a general rule that applies.
You find that you need a little more oomph if you're running with a magneto as opposed to a point ignition or electronic ignition. Mags make the least power when they need it the most, and that's start.
Yeah, their advantage is the faster you spin them, the better it works. Coils are simple. They're a little transformer in a package. So you run into strange things. It tells you in here what to read for resistance on the coil, and that'd be between the two low voltage terminals, not the high tension lead. Very, simple. They do one thing. They fire when the voltage changes. So you would think that you would close contacts and make a spark. Actually, you open the contacts, and the magnetism in the coil, magnetic field collapses and causes a current in the high voltage, because that's its only way out. The low voltage is open at this point. It's its only way out, and makes a spark. And then again, we get into the multi-cylinder bikes that have a double-ended coil. So now it's got a gap here and a gap there, and it's going to fire both of them. Works pretty good until such time as somebody tries it with one of the plug wires, one of the two plug wires disconnected. And then it wants to fire both of them, but this one won't fire at all because it's not open. One of those problem things. So a little troubleshooting on the, and personally, I got enough. I don't have a full pickup load, Joe, but I probably have a box of coils, so I just try enough coil. Then the points. Points are what makes this work. We go back to that wiring diagram again. And off of the coil to ground, we see two symbols that look almost the same. One's rectangular boxes and the other's just straight lines. The bottom one is your contacts, your points contact. And the upper one's the condenser. People want to know, well, what does the condenser do? You can't change the voltage across the condenser or capacitor, which is the proper name for it these days. You can't change that voltage instantaneously. So what happens is the points open up, and that would cause that coil to start dumping current, and you're going to get some flow through the capacitors. But it tends to, first of all, since you can't change that voltage instantaneously, it won't spark across the points. That capacitor is acting as a damper to keep it from being, quote, instantaneously open. The other thing it does is it stores a little energy, which when the point's open, it's dumping back into the discharge system to make your spark a little hotter. Okay.
Looks like a shock absorber.
Yeah, an electrical shock absorber. There's
It's
two
a
of
surge
them.
device.
There's two of them involved here. The coil is an inductance, and you can't change the current through a coil instantaneously. You can't change the voltage across a capacitor instantaneously, so it tends to, like you said, be a damper on the electrical system. The coil, the fact that you can't change that current immediately, means that it's going to continue to flow once you open those points. It wants to go to ground, it's going to start to flow, and it's going to make that magnetic field from the secondary, from the low voltage end up to the high voltage end to make a spark. Now on points, the British bikes that I'm familiar with, which is 60s and 70s, late stuff. The older stuff, like my old 66 BSA, the points plate can be rotated to adjust the timing. So you get your timing light out, or you get the plug that goes in there and adjust that first set of points, and then you go, well, now I need to adjust the other points for the other cylinder. Well, to save a nickel or two, that other points, the second set of points isn't adjustable in duration. You adjust it by adjusting the gap, which is a piss poor way to do it. Fortunately, they later came out with a double plate adjustment, so you can set the points on one cylinder and you can set them exactly the same way on the second cylinder. And when you get to the trident area, all three are adjustable. Of course, by that time, you've already gone to a Boyer branch and some other brands will actually start.
You got a 3-stage Lucas relay in there.
Yeah. We've covered the condenser a little bit, and symptoms include rough running. You look at the points to see if the condenser's doing its job. If the points are getting pitted, then it's sparking across there, and the condenser isn't dampening it as it should. Electronic ignition, there's way too many types out there. One of the old home club members, Steve Siegel, he could make an ignition system out of a set of GM magnetic pickups for about anything. You should have stuck with that and got rich instead of looking for a living.
About condensers, I've heard that one of the symptoms for a condenser that might be bad or starting to go bad is once the bike gets hot, it's hard for it to start. Once the condenser is warm, it doesn't perform as well. Is that something that sounds true, or is that?
Well, I don't doubt that it would happen, but you look at where the points are, what they're connected to, and how much temperature rise will you get in the cases when the engine's running. It'd have to be fairly extreme, I would think, for it to affect the condensers. Ideally, the reason we all have multiple bikes is so we got other ones to pull parts off and test. So, yeah, use that as excuse number one. But it's cheaper if I buy the whole thing, honey. Okay. Avoid disconnecting one plug on a multi-cylinder engine with electronic ignition.
When it's running.
When it's, or before you start it.
Avoid doing what?
Don't put one plug wire off. If you have the shared coil or even a regular electronic, because you don't know for sure how they're firing it. The Boyer Branson is a magnet hidden in a little coil. That's typical. That's your camshaft position sensor on a car.
Did you guys want to start with any advertising?
So this goes for like if you were trying to find out if you have spark on a spark plug and you're holding the spark plug outside of the engine on the side of the cylinder and then spinning the engine to see if the spark plug is sparking. Is that
What what I found, having had singles or twin cylinder British bikes, is you pull a spark plug out to see which one of the damn cylinders isn't firing today. So I pull the plug bar off. If it doesn't stop,
It's the other one.
it's dead. But someone that Joe knows was having problems with his Kawasaki loading up on 2 cylinders, and it was because his dual-ended coil had gone bad. Well, time's up. Okay, well, that's pretty much for it for ignition systems. Or for what I know about ignition systems. Are there any questions?
What about spark plug gap?
I'm in favor of it.
Good idea.
You run the risk of making it too wide to jump if you open the gap up. I mean, they tell you someone somewhere in the literature wrote down what they wanted for a gap on your engine. And that's what it should be set to. Now, when you go screwing with the engine, maybe putting a hotter cam in or a bigger car or a 540 kit and your wife's, anyway, when you do those things, it's time to make sure you're running the right heat range plug again. And I can tell you from an SR 540cc SR 500 that it no longer is a BP70S, BP80S. Makes it run wonderfully. The 7, and you would think that one number wouldn't be that much difference, but it just ran like crap with the factory plug-in. Now, one of the things I mentioned is, somebody should do a seminar on spark plugs, because you've got your platinum or iridium plugs that don't eat away and change your gap setting so much. And then remember the old Kawasaki 2-stroke triples? Those had a surface gap spark plug because they didn't have any room in the cylinders once they got those heads on them. So there's very little that hasn't been tried by somebody over the years, and you don't know. Well, with the British, it's because they didn't have any money to buy another machine to do anything with. They spent years. Emil was worried. You want us to make 2 kinds of carbs? Can't we make these look like a Mikuni and just call that good? So,
Type of plugs, NGK, Champion, all
okay,
of that.
NGK, Champion. I will never run a Delco plug after it left me stranded out in the back roads of Iowa. I just put a new plug in it. We've gone about 15 miles, 2 up on the bike, and it quit running. Fortunately, I had the old plug along, but I'd never heard of a plug packing it up 15 miles before. Stick with it.
Why was it necessary to change plugs? What should go bad?
What could go bad with them?
Well, why would you change it?
I changed it because I was at the mileage interval recommended by the manufacturer to change it.
That's why.
Why? That's a good question. Now that all the cars run, 75 or 100,000 miles on a set of plugs. Why don't bikes do that? Most of them is because of the carburetor. You're running too rich, it soots them up, or you're running too lean, which eats them up. a road. It's hot.
Barring the fouling like you're talking about, the reason to change plugs is the electrode is not square anymore. And without the sharp edge,
It's trouble starting.
it takes more voltage to ionize fuel air mixture to create the spark. So that's why when you run your plugs too long in your car, the voltage keeps going higher and higher and higher, and it can burn your coils up on these modern. On a modern, say a Ford pickup, try to run it 150,000 miles, set of plugs, you're supposed to change on the set. It can damage a lot of coils. And that's the reason. The gap gets wider. And if it's a traditional plug, it's not like a fine wire. And it's got, nice squared off electrode. It takes more voltage
Well, so I
to
hate to beat a dead dog.
ionize the gas.
I hate to beat a dead dog, but so, let's say you get a new set of plugs, and the gap's too wide, and you take even a little bender, and you bend it. Basically, you're kind of bending it, like, let's say you're here, you're kind of bending it like this, instead of flat, unless you do it different. So you're kind of bending it like this,
But if you have.
Is there a better way to bend it
you
so
have
that
to
it's
move it that
more
far.
like you're really getting that flat spot all along the length of that?
I think with,
You know what I mean?
yeah, you're not perpendicular
You're not perpendicular,
to the
right?
electrode.
Does it matter?
electrode itself.
Does that matter?
I think what Jim was gonna say is when you buy the plugs, they're gonna be very close to the right gap. And what you're talking about would really take an extreme situation for it to change.
Yeah.
Any new plug though, you never assume you always check it. And if you go back to where the electrode portion meets the body and the threads, if you'll bend it there first too far and then back the straight edge back away from the electrode, you can keep that perpendicular
Okay,
status.
okay, yeah, I get it.
Although you rarely have to move it more than just fractions. Very little.
It's a little tap if it's,
Yeah, just hair's breadth.
okay. I think we've certainly covered everything I didn't know yet about ignition systems. Second system is a charging system. Now, who has a generator equipped bike?
Generator equipped by, raise your hand.
I got a half a dozen pictures.
And the guy's hands aren't near that plane.
No, I don't. I don't have one to talk from even, but. So, knowing that I was gonna ride over here with my more knowledgeable and biggest critic, Mr. Rapisto, he goes, well, what about polarization? You know, they always tell people when they've changed the battery or changed the voltage regulator, you need to polarize the system. Flash it just for a second. What does that do? Well, that sets the polarity of the rotor, the magnet of the rotor, so that it's at its maximum intensity, the right place. It's real easy to tell if you've done it wrong. If you start it up and the ammeter goes negative when you rev it, shut it off quick and polarize it. Now, if you go on the web, you will see umpteen different discussions. You need to do it every time you change the battery. No, you don't need to do it. Well, you need to do it, it'll go away if the bike's been sitting for years and years and years. Well, that's more likely than having it need to be changed every time. Let's see, if I start the bike, when it's done charging, this stuff isn't all connected yet, is it? So, because otherwise all of our batteries would be dead in 2 days when we went back out and started again. So I don't see exactly how polarization is required so often, but better safe than sorry. Have a diagram, look something up on the web. You can find a diagram for setting the polarity on your case diesel tractor if you look hard enough. And decide for yourself, is it really necessary?
How do you do it on the 65?
On what?
On the BSA? Didn't you say you had a 68 BSA?
But it hasn't ordered.
Okay, so this should be for a generator.
This is just for a generator.
How do you do it? How do you apply it on the generator?
You have a charging loop. Generator, regulator, battery, ground, generator, regulator, battery, ground, generator, regulator, battery, ground. It's a closed loop. Anytime you open that loop for whatever reason, you close it back, you have to repolarize. And only then.
How do you do that?
You short the battery terminal to the field terminal of the generator. And
Or on the regulator. Either one. It's the same two wires. They're here and they're here.
the picture shows you which ones to hit.
And you put
Can
a
I
short-
borrow?
Short through it.
Just momentarily, you can use two screwdrivers and touch them together or whatever.
Jump the wire.
Oh, I see.
That's all it is, and it's just instantaneous. It's pop, and it's done.
Yeah.
You probably won't even see a spark unless it's real dark area. It just happens.
Man, I'm just gonna make a comment here, guys. This stuff we're talking about here is so much more difficult than doing gas bypass on it. I'm just telling you. I'll teach you how to do that in 5 minutes.
Hard work ain't tough, but if you know how. Neither is this.
There's
Anything that opens that loop, anything that, if you cut a wire in half, if you take the battery out, if you put a new regulator in there, if you put the generator, put it back together. Generator, regulator, battery, ground, generator, regulator, battery, ground, generator, regulator. You open that loop,
How about if you're just sitting there and you say, I gotta go put that charger on my motorcycle, and you let it go too low.
you didn't open the loop, you just went from positive to negative on the battery with the charger. You didn't open the loop.
But if the battery goes dead,
You still didn't open the loop unless you disconnect something.
okay.
Now I don't know if he's still in business, there was a guy in England, and he had a van, and he did motorcycle electronics,
Almost 1,500.
and he would drive the country and let people know where he'd be when, and work on bikes. And the name of his business was Electric Trickery. And what defeats us is the distance between our populations. You could never make it work here, so you gotta find something. But, okay, Jim, we're at 3 o'clock. Do you want to save the next system for another meeting?
Yeah, if you can.
I can do
it'll
that.
be, It'll probably
It'll be
be,
January,
No.
at least
yeah, January.
slot it in. I'll try to pace myself a little bit.
I'll start with.
Sounds good to me.
All right.
I appreciate what you're
Adjourned.
doing.